Welcome to Modern Day Economics, where we discuss economic issues and events that affect our families and communities here in the United States. You can find us on YouTube and all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. Today, we're going to talk about the federal budget balance. So essentially, it's the difference between income and expenses that the federal government has. Of course, there's been a lot of talk in the news and in the financial industry in general about a deficit being run very persistently. And of course, this resulting in large amounts of government debt. But really want to dive into the releases of budget balance a little bit more to show a little bit more detail on what exactly is going on. Is the federal government producing more income than it is spending? Is it the other way around? What exactly is going on? Well, there is a new economic release from the Department of the Treasury that came out not too long ago, just a few days ago on August 10th. And it displays that on the month, there was a deficit of 211 billion US dollars. So there already was an expectation of a deficit that was significantly lower. And for at least for most people in consideration, because the expectation for deficit was of $194 billion. So a difference of a deficit of $17 billion. So 17 billion more was spent than what was projected or expected. So why is this important, and why is this something that people should really take into consideration? Well, there's really only one way that the federal government makes money, and that's via tax revenue. So the government collects taxes in many ways, shapes, and forms. And this is essentially the revenue, the income line on the income statement of the federal government. And then there's a set of expenses. However, there is something that really differentiates the government with any corporation or company or really individual or family, that is that they have the ability to persistently and consistently spend more than they make, um, because they have the power over not only fiscal policy, which is the ability of how much to tax, but also the ability of monetary policy, which is how many dollars to create, how much to what some understand is printing money. Um, so for the average person listening to this, and really it's important to take into consideration if we continue to run persistent deficit spending. And if you look at last month's number, the deficit is of 89 billion. You look at the month before that, there's a deficit of 66 billion. I do see 1 month. Okay, so the month prior there was a surplus, but um, we look at the all the other months before that. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 months before that. Out of those, only one has a surplus. So the majority of months have a deficit, of course. Um, Really, we have to start to consider, well, how is this going to be financed? Because at the end of the day, in any scenario like this, where an individual, company, or government spends more than they make consistently, someone has to pay the bill. One way or another, someone ends up paying the bill. And, well, that is, as of right now, what has, some say, has caused the tremendous amount of government debt. Well, who pays for that government debt, and how is that government debt paid for? Well, there's, as we talked about earlier, there's really only two main ways or two main areas to look at here. There is the income side of the equation, which is tax revenue, right? And of course, the government can raise taxes That is one way to collect more revenue and pay for the outstanding debt. But the other way that a lot of people are not really taking into consideration, and it is very important to take into consideration and analyze, is the printing of money. If you print money, according to some economists like Milton Friedman, inflation is no more than a monetary phenomenon. This is a quote from Milton Friedman, not an exact quote, but something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing here, but if you really consider this, what does inflation do on debt? So if you are able to pay off that in depreciated dollars, let's say you bought a home in the 70s that was $30,000 and now cost $300,000. Well, the mortgage you took out in the 70s, if it's still there, if you decide to refinance it in some capacity, the monthly payments are probably not very significant or material in this day and age. And that is one way um, that some say the government and therefore the society may end up paying for this deficit spending and this debt. So definitely something to look out for. Definitely something to pay very close attention to. I mean, just in one month, spending $211 billion more than one makes, that's a lot of money. That is a lot of money to have in deficit spending. So definitely something to really pay very close attention to, and how sustainable it is to consistently spend more than one makes. Would you spend consistently more than you make every single month for decades in your household? Little things to consider, of course, to say the least. But thank you for listening today to Modern Day Economics. Stay tuned for more economic news and events.